which is what the picture says. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 15. Does this sound familiar to anybody in this group this morning? Okay. There was a little confusion on my part. Kevin told me it was Galatians 5. Our congregation in Kaiser the last year has been in a study of Ephesians. Our preaching has been from Ephesians, and we've had some other classes. Until almost the last minute, I really thought we were going to do Ephesians 5. And then I got an email from Kevin that said Galatians, and Titus picked up on that. And then we had to backtrack. But we got to figure it out. We're in the right place. So let's go to Galatians 5, 1 through 15. Let's read out loud with feeling, and we'll get going on this thing, okay? Do we have anybody here who would like to read for us this morning? I knew Gideon would volunteer. Awesome. Thank you, Gideon. Okay, use your big boy voice, because you are a big boy. 5, 1 through 15.
For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. Look, I, Paul, say to you that if you accept circumcision, Christ will be of no advantage to you. I testify again to every man who accepts circumcision that he is obligated to keep the whole law. You are severed from Christ, you who would be justified by the law. You have fallen away from grace. For through the Spirit, by faith, we ourselves eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything, but only faith working through love. You were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion is not from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. I have confidence in the Lord that you will take no other view. The one who is troubling you will bear the penalty, whoever he is. But if I, brothers, still preach circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. I wish those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. For you who were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another.
Ooh, mister. All right, let me just start this way. I'm not sure how your study of Galatians has progressed so far, and if you've spent any time in this passage. I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist, but I do think Kevin gave us this passage in particular because there's some adult content in here. So I think he's up to something. Well, let me just start this. There's a lot of stuff in those 15 sentences. Stuff that catches your attention, that you react to, just something you want to make sure that we talk about, that you like, you don't like. Or as you've been working through Galatians, you see some connections between this section and the rest of the letter so far.
As we've been going through it, the connections seem to be what justifies us uses her works, and it's a reiteration over and over again. It seems to be throughout the whole book of arguments saying that you're saved by grace in Jesus, faith in Jesus, not through the works of the old law. That if you accept one part of the old law, you accept the whole law, and then you'll be.
Okay. What's your name again? Larry. All right. Thanks, Larry. Good comment. Some of the rest of you? You, sir?
Specifically, the book is tackling Judaizing, is specifically what it's dealing with here.
Yeah. And I'm assuming you guys have talked about this quite a bit, that apparently these churches in Galatia that Paul has had a hand in establishing and teaching and nurturing. It's a good reminder that in the ancient, or in the first century world, you had all these house churches, but you had lots of Christian teachers coming and going all the time. We kind of tend, I think, sometimes to think of Paul as just out there on the frontier by himself. But you can tell from reading his letters in Acts as well. Paul has a whole group of compatriots and co-workers that come and go from his churches. And he overlaps in places. We know he overlapped with Peter. We know he overlapped with John. John had a relationship with the churches in Ephesus, so did Paul, right? So sometimes we just think it's like just kind of Paul out there by himself. But it's really a lot of Christian teachers. And some of those people are people that come from a very Jewish background, just like Paul. And they're coming to these churches in Galatia that are Jew and Gentile together, but probably more Gentiles than Jews. And what they're saying is, yeah, you can believe in Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, and you can accept him as Lord of all things. But to do that, you've also got to be Jewish, or you've got to subscribe to the first covenant, the covenant with Moses. That means all you men are going to have to be circumcised, and you're going to have to do all the stuff that went along with that first covenant, right? So it's this idea of Jesus and Moses, Jesus and law obedience. Michael?
In verse 7, before he gets to all that PG-13 part, he makes this reference to track and field, which is weird. He says, you were running a good race. Who cut in on you? It's like, oh, that's exactly what he's, somebody cut in front of you and disqualified themselves, or you, or both, or, they broke the rules.
Yeah.
They're doing it wrong.
Yeah, they're doing it wrong.
They're telling them something that isn't right.
Yeah, and
He
he's...
say who it is. He's asking, who is it? Who is it? You obviously have heard something that, isn't what is in the gospel.
Yeah, there's several. That's really interesting. Like, if you read through all of Galatians, unlike some of Paul's other letters, you don't see any names of any of his co-workers, nor does he name any of these opponents, right? Like if you read Romans, there's a whole long list of people in chapter 16 that he greets in the house churches in Rome. Colossians, etc. He has all these, right? This one you can tell is clearly directed to like a larger group of churches. And he doesn't even kind of thing. And in Paul's mind, it's really clear through the rest of the letter. You can be a disciple of Jesus and be all in with Jesus and not be all in with Moses. It doesn't mean that the Torah is unimportant or valueless or worthless. He doesn't wad up the first covenant and throw that away. But really, he's then picking up on this metaphor of circumcision and saying about his opponents, about these Judaizing teachers, while they're in the business of trimming things up, right? They should just go, and he literally, in Greek, just says, they should go the whole way and cut it all off. So, not exactly the language you expect for Sunday morning worship. Right?
Hard to reproduce.
That may be part of his thinking as well, right? He would like this whole thing to end. Tell me your name again, sir. Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, going back to chapter 2, I remember he describes them as false brothers who come in specifically to hold. So he's not saying, hey, these are Christians who just have a poor grasp of what's going on. He's saying these people are of the enemy. It's not saying, hey, these are misguided brothers who are confused. These people are here to specifically pull you away from Christ.
Yeah. It's deliberate. What they're actually, efforting at doing is pulling these people toward Judaism, right? And it's a way of undoing the good news. And I think you guys probably discussed this. This is the only letter that Paul writes where at the beginning of the letter he has no thanksgiving section, right? Ancient letters had a set form. There was 5 major parts. The second part is always a word of thanksgiving. In Paul's letters, he takes that thanksgiving section and he expands it into he always expands it into a listing or a chronicling of his prayers for the church that he's writing to. In Galatians, there is none of that. There's a very simple greeting, and then he gets right into the body of the letter where he starts with, I'm astonished to find out that you've so quickly embraced another gospel, right? And so it emphasizes that point, Adam, that this is not, we have some misunderstanding. We kind of got to clear this up, right? So this is really serious. What is going on here has the ability or the capability of undoing the gospel and then undoing the church, right? So we're not just kind of messing around with some confusion or misunderstanding. It has high stakes, right? And yeah, that there's a deliberateness on these other teachers' parts of trying to move this group away from faith in Jesus and toward commitment to the Torah. Mike?
It seems like if you were going to buy into this, I need to get circumcised thing, and that was the only part of Judaism that you were participating in, it's as worthless as getting baptized. I mean, never ever doing anything remotely Christian.
Yeah, it's like an embracing of the seal of the covenant, but with no commitment to the covenant, right? And we have seen that, unfortunately, in the church where you have what I call baptized undisciples, right? Like baptism is for disciples only, right? There's nothing about baptism in itself that is magical in the sense of that doesn't make your relationship with God and his people right on its own, right? Just like a person could be a circumcised person and still be in relationship with God and God's people that's not right. Any other stuff in here catch your attention for starters? Terry? Larry? Barry? Don't get me on Mary. Yeah, there's kind of a good off-ramp we can just do a little bit with. It's always important to remember, let me tell you what you brought up with verse 1. For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm there and do not submit to a yoke of slavery. And then what you read 13, you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only don't use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become slaves to one another. There's great reversal there, right? He says, you've been set free from slavery. Don't go back to that yoke. But in the love of Jesus, be slaves to one another. It's also important for us to remember, man, you roll into this text from American cultural perspective, there's language there that you got to really sort out, right? Because we got concepts in the country that we live in of what freedom is that have nothing to do with this passage whatsoever, right? Our culture's definition of freedom is what the verse you brought up. It is an opportunity for self-indulgence. That's how our culture really understands freedom, is you are free to do what you want. Right? The Christian idea about freedom is that you are free to become a servant to other people. You're free from your own enslavement to sin and death and the powers. Instead, then you're set free from those things in order to be able to serve others, which is a very different idea about freedom than the culture that we live in, right? And that's a constant battle. And for Christian people here is this pull to be pulled into a different idea about freedom that comes from the voice of the United States than what comes from the voice of Jesus. And yeah, so that freedom produces infinite opportunity to do good, right? To brothers and sisters and to other people. And we don't usually think of that as freedom, that we've been set free to do good for other people, but that certainly is how Jesus thinks about it. All right, class goes till 10:45. Okay, just checking. Class should be an hour, okay? This is my annual complaint. So you'll hear it now. Maybe if things go well, you'll hear it again this time next year. Or you might next week, that's right. To really get good stuff going as adults, you got to have an hour to really chew on it. I'm guessing that for the Midvale Church, there's been no problem lately with Judaizing teachers. Have you been involved in arguments about circumcision or food laws? The potluck today is not going to be kosher. I should hope not. I hope there's going to be something with pork in it, because everything about pork is delicious. The point I'm making is I think sometimes this situation that Paul is dealing with the churches in Galatia seems really, really far away from us. Judaizing has not been an issue for the church really since 70 AD. Because in 70 AD, the Romans marched into Jerusalem, besieged the city, destroyed the temple, and really the socio-political center of first century Judaism was just eradicated. There's, of course, Jewish people all over the Roman Empire in the first century, but Jerusalem was really still the heart of Judaism. And once the temple was destroyed, that was not the case. And then actually later, 50 years later, the Romans came into Jerusalem, or what was left of it, again, and kicked all of the Jewish people out of Jerusalem for quite some time, because they were just constantly a political thorn in the Romans' side. So since then, like the connection to our Jewish roots as believers in Jesus has just moved further and further away. And I mean, the vast majority of any Christian church anywhere on the face of the earth now, it's all Gentile people. Like, you occasionally run into a Jewish believer, and there are congregations of Messianic Jews, but we just don't see those folks much, and we don't deal with it. So I think sometimes, thinking through this can seem like you're getting in the Wayback Machine with Mr. Peabody, and you're talking about a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't exist or have any consequence for us today. But here's kind of a thing I want to put in your mind and have Titus share about. Really what these Judaizing teachers are doing, okay, is now their bent or hang up is the first covenant between Yahweh and Israel and the law of Moses and all like that. But what they're really doing is they're emphasizing the idea of it's Jesus and something, right? It's discipleship to Jesus, being welcomed into this new covenant in Jesus' blood, and accepting the Torah, and obedience to Jewish Torah. Which is amazing on Paul's part that he doesn't do that, because that's Paul's entire growing up background experience, right? That's the system he was completely committed to, and it was because of that system that he was committed to eliminating the way, because he saw the way as a threat to the well-being of first century Judaism. But what they're trying to do is say, we got Jesus, that's all good, right? But for this to be legit, you really also need to have Moses and circumcision and Torah observance and all like that. That part, I think, is where we can easily connect with this idea that there's, in all cultures, ours included, there's always some idea about it's Jesus and something. Right? And what Paul's really pushing us back towards is, no, it's actually really just Jesus and trust in him. So what I want Titus to do, Titus is, he and his lovely wife Libby are living in Texas and going to school at Sunset International Bible Institute to train for ministry. This summer they're living in Richland, Washington and doing an internship with the Richland Church of Christ. And they made the effort to come down to Catfish-orama and fish with us all this week, which has been great. But Titus has got some Jesus and stuff to share with you from his own experience, so take it away.
Testing. There we go. Okay. Yeah. I come from a long line of Jesus ands. Yeah. So, for those who do not know me, I'm Titus. My family has been Christian for a very long time. They have a very unique look on Christianity, though. So they've got the core beliefs of baptism, following Jesus. But then they get into a lot of conspiracies and debates about eschatology and end times and a whole lot of, it gets kind of crazy. So the purpose that I wanted to share some of my experiences with this is because it is this concept of Jesus and. They've started with their relationship with Jesus. They started as Christians, but then they started to reach out into, I consider, the leaven that is ruining the batch. They start reaching out into these ands of, specifically, I have a lot of stories that I could share, but I'm just going to choose two examples. One is, has anyone heard about the flat earth theory? Yeah. I don't know if anyone, I don't mean to offend anyone if anyone is of that. Personally, I am not. So my family is, and they're very ironically hell-bent on it. So they're very adamant about this. And so one day I had a conversation over the phone with my sister, and I was talking to her about it, and I was debating with her. It was a healthy conversation, as healthy as that could be, and eventually I asked her a question. We were debating for it must have been 3 hours. We were on the phone together, and eventually I get to a point where I ask her, okay, Susie, her name's Susie, say, okay, so we talked about this. I want to ask you a question. If you were to talk to a new convert or to an unbeliever, someone who's lost, how would you start this conversation of how would you bring them to Christ? How would you initiate that? And I kid you not, her knee-jerk reaction to that question was flat earth. That's how I start my conversation with them. My jaw just dropped to the floor because it's just, that is completely missing the point of Jesus. She's taking that concept, and I love them to death. I don't mean to just drag them through the mud, but they've taken this concept just like the recipients to this letter were listening to the Judaic law, the Mosaic law, and they were running with it. Kind of what Mike said earlier, it's not the gospel. And the real result that it has, and I'll get into my second example of it, is that it polarizes you drastically to a point where you're ineffective as a Christian. You won't have fruits as a Christian if you latch on to this Jesus and philosophy or ideologue, whatever you want to call it. So there's this program in Texas. Originally, I left to Texas for it. It's called AIM. It's Adventures in Missions is what it stands for. Anyway, so they have a very different set of beliefs than my mom does. Again, love her to death. But these simple, little, detailed things that she disagreed on, she was willing and prepared to cut ties with me entirely because I wanted to do this thing that was fully a Christian program, fully adamant about spreading the gospel and good things. But she was prepared because it didn't follow the exact eschatology belief that she held, she was prepared to cut ties and burn a bridge. And that's kind of the result that this has, is it polarizes you, and kind of like how I was mentioning with the Western world today, that specifically the U.S., we have a lot of Jesus and politics, or Jesus and Trump, or Jesus and whatever. We latch on to that second part too much, or even a little bit, like verse 9 says, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Just that little bit polarizes you so drastically to the other side. But if you were focused on the Jesus part, which is what it should be, you wouldn't have that polarized arc to, combat you, to talk to others of the opposite camp. But yeah, that's kind of the two examples that I prepared. Yeah. Thoughts, questions?
When you made the decision to go to AIM,
Mm-hmm.
that went pretty badly between you and Mom.
I don't know how you picked up on that. Yeah, it went very poorly.
Bring up the source.
No, I don't.
I don't know the details, and we don't necessarily need to hear them, but my recollection was that she pretty much just put you out of the house.
Yeah. So again, I love her to death, and we've.
18 years old.
Yeah, I was 19. I think I just turned 19, and it was because I decided to go to AIM. I showed up. I came home from work one day, and she met me at the door, and she's just like, I can't have anything to do with this program, and I don't want you to be in it, so pack your things, you're out. So it's not really a sore subject to me, because at this point we've kind of made amends. So again, love her to death. I don't want to tear her down, but for the sake of edification, I think it's a really powerful example of how out of control this ideologue of Jesus and can get if you're not really focused on the Jesus part. Yeah.
So, I don't believe the earth is flat.
Score.
With that being said, I've had Bible studies with people that do.
Mm-hmm.
And there's categories. There's flat earth, there's deep of the earth, this is 6,000 years old, or
Mm-hmm.
13.5 billion years old. And there's ramifications of those decisions. For instance, if the earth existed prior to Adam, where does it come from, and stuff like
Yeah.
that. When I have discussions on this with these people, some are like your mom, where, okay, we're not going to fellowship with you unless you say what we say. But then other people, they're taking a more literal interpretation of Old Testament scripture that I think was meant to be more metaphorical or allegorical, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
in what they're describing. So I don't necessarily have a problem if somebody says they believe the earth is flat. I don't see that fitting into theology, but it's when it's the foundation of their belief system. So I think it's a mistake to try to use science to persuade people to Jesus.
Yeah.
There is a time and place for science, but our faith is not based on science, it's based on the Word. And
Mm-hmm.
we talk about etymology, about, okay, was this meant to be literal or not? And when I study it, the evidence says those are figurative statements, but those are the things where I don't think we should divide the church over.
Yeah.
We actually had a ministry meeting last week, and when we're done with Galatians
Yeah. Are you? I think this is what you're saying. So correct me if I'm wrong, but in my experience, when people have that hell-bent fixation on the "and" part, most of the time they end up separating themselves, like on their own.
Yeah, we've done that. You know, I think the group that meets here, I think there's only 2 families out of 10 or 12 that have their roots in Church of Christ, so we have a diverse group that
Mhm.
comes here, and we, in a sense, do that to ourselves. Oh, if you want to be a Christian, you have to go to church, you have to do this, and we put have tos on it. And so just like the Judaizing teachers, just like the other people, we have those same tendencies, but as you had said, it's really all Jesus.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say me, I'm guilty of what you're talking about. I have to watch myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's do this together, Titus.
Yeah.
Other comments? Any of this? Adam?
I think actually the Judaizing heresy is come back in a large way. It was gone for a long time, but it's come back in a large way. We have many leaders, especially in America here, it's not so much in Europe, but you have many leaders who say, who teach that Jewish people are still under God's covenant, or still saved, or as a Christian, we have a duty to protect Israel. And when you, and that goes completely against what Galatians teaches, but that's very much exactly what Paul's saying here. It's like, oh, you have to support this to be a Christian. And that's come back in a large way in the last 100 or so years in America. So, yeah, I think it's actually very relevant to a lot of our conversations, especially on the geopolitical spectrum,
Yeah.
because we have leaders all the time saying, no, we have to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you just start thinking broadly about this kind of Jesus and thing. You can think in lots of spectrums, right? So I'll give one. Probably all of you, most of us know about various prosperity gospel preachers, teachers, etc., right? The way that works is, it's Jesus and wealth. And the notion is that if a person is a, faithful disciple of Jesus, there's going to be the accumulation or development of wealth in their life, today, tomorrow, in the present tense, right? And then you can just watch that unfold from a distance, historically or on the internet or whatever. And what you always see is any person that buys into that, or any of these people that become prominent, what always happens is it's the "and" part that really becomes what the message is about. Right? Like, you can spend any time watching sermons, presentations from any of these sort of people, and what's really clear is what really is important, or what really counts, is the development and accumulation of wealth, right? So yeah, it's Jesus and this is a great proverb that Paul uses about, a little yeast leavens the whole loaf, or the whole lump. That's how these things always work, right? Is that whatever the "and" is, gradually it becomes more and more and more the thing till it really is the thing. And it does produce, like your experience, Titus, this polarization, right? And that's even what the Galatian churches were experiencing, right? This polarization of, well, it's really commitment to the covenant through Moses. That's really going to be what actually really counts, right, Mike?
The "and" thing, whatever it is, doesn't even necessarily have to be something negative or nefarious or out there crazy like flat Earth, for instance. It could just be as ordinary as patriotism in America,
Yeah, America.
I'm as patriotic as I come. I love living in America. I've been to lots of other parts of the world. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. But I guarantee you that Paul was not talking about the stars and stripes when he wrote what he wrote.
Yeah,
We weren't even a dream of a dream, when this stuff was
Yeah, and I mean, that's another one, right? Jesus and the United States. And you can just start thinking about, I mean, all kinds of things. I had thought about this the other day. I was on my way from one place to the other, and this fella pulled up to me, or next to me at a light with a pickup and a trailer. And his trailer, cargo trailer, had some logo about Christian motorcyclists, right? I don't know anything about these people. I don't know how you ride a motorcycle in a distinctly Christian way. Right? And I don't have anything against any of these guys, but it just struck me, okay, what's really the thing that's important here, right? It's more about being a motorcyclist, right? It doesn't mean these people are unfaithful Christian, but it's clear that the message is the and thing is really the thing that this particular thing's about, right? And so you can bounce on like some controversial stuff, your understanding of physics and science and all like that. What shape is the Earth? I always wished it was the shape of a donut. Right? But when you have these ands, it always works that way. The human culture works to where it makes the and the most significant thing. And then you do what you experience, and that is the division that produces, right? And then it does not then enable a community to live together in unity and in good works. And that it can be a whole bunch of stuff, right? It can be and how our church functions, right? It can be Jesus and a certain church structure. There's hundreds of them. You can think about, this is part of your experience too, homeschooling, right? There's some folks that like, that is the commitment, right? It's apparently connected to or driven by this, connection with Jesus. But these things can always get out of balance. And then ironically, what we want to do is then make a new set of rules about, well, it can't be that, right? So you just get into this cycle instead of a cycle of, service to one another and love and care for one another. You can get into a cycle of figuring out, well, which end can you have and which one you can't, right?
Creates its own religion.
What has it done to the rest of the family, like extended family? Or
I haven't talked to them.
siblings, or are they just all?
It destroys relationships because, our family's super secluded because of it.
Larry?
I was having a discussion with my wife, I think it was either this morning or last night, we were talking about controversies, as you mentioned. And there's a quote that says, communication has to precede reconciliation. So the problem is that when we have these abrupt cutoffs, there's never going to be reconciliation.
Yeah.
When the communication stops. And so I think that's where we just need to really be careful and come together and continue to communicate. And it sounds like Titus, you didn't have the opportunity to say to your mom, hey, let me explain to you why I'm doing this. It's like, no, you're out. And that's really dangerous, I think, especially in the church.
Yeah. So that's what we got. And I'll just end with this because it is time. Everybody can have their own individual end too. You can think of kind of like the larger cultural things, like Jesus and America, Jesus and particular political perspectives or, whatever. But you can have your own and just in the context of your own life and family. And I think that's always a very good question for us to ask is like, okay, it really becomes this battle of loyalties. Am I really loyal to Jesus and who he is and what he calls us to in being a person that fulfills the law by loving others? Or do I have Jesus and some other loyalty? And I think that if you kind of boil it all the way down for a congregation and for each disciple, I think that's a really good place to land, is to reflect on, okay, what are my loyalties, right? And what thing is it that I will really defend that may not actually be something that Jesus calls me to embrace or defend? That's what we got. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Class should be an hour.